Hey folks, welcome into this video about doing a think aloud for us to help students integrate information from different sources. And a think aloud sounds very wonderful and very complicated and all these things, but I assure you it's not. Essentially what a think aloud is doing is you are modeling for your students what is going through your mind as you're doing a particular task. So we weren't born knowing how to do any skills. We learned all these skills as we came up through school and life. So we're going to model for students how we learn the various techniques here. So I'm going to model about how can we put together information from different sources. So here I go. All right, guys, I'm kind of a visual learner, so I'm going to start with this map. I see a map of the United States. And always when I look at a map, I want to look at two things first. First of all, I want to look at the title, and I can see that it says women's suffrage or women getting the right to vote before 1920. And always with the map, you want to look at the key down here. So we can see these various colors stand for various things. There's no women's suffrage in this color. There is partial women's suffrage in this color. And there's equal suffrage. In other words, women can vote along with men, and the date that happened with this color. So kind of the darker to the lighter, we're seeing equal suffrage, some suffrage, no suffrage. So trying to look and see, does this map tell me anything? Does it tell a story? What story does it tell if it is telling a story? The story to me seems to be for this map that women got suffrage in the Western U.S. And it's almost kind of strange here, almost very lined up, where in the far west here we see women's suffrage, here in the Midwest some, but then here in the east and the south especially there's not a whole lot. So very interesting. The story that I'm seeing here is women's suffrage far west, but the further east we go, it seems the less suffrage we have, or if we want to do it the other way, the further west we go, the more suffrage, the more that women have the right to vote. So the map told us quite a bit. Since I'm a visual learner, I like to hit these political cartoons next, then we'll hit the reading. So political cartoons, we're doing some things similar to the map. I'm first taking a look at the title, and then I'm going to look for any symbols that I see and see what story this is telling me. So I see that this is entitled The Awakening. So I'm trying to think, what are we waking up from? I noticed the date, it's February 1915, and these things all have to do with women's suffrage. So we noticed on the map that a lot of these far western states had suffrage before 1915. So we're seeing a symbol here. And this looks to me like the Statue of Liberty, Lady Liberty. She's holding her torch and she's pointing. And I always try to look to see if there's symbols on things, if there's writing on things, and I can see that it says, it's not easy to see, but it says votes for women. So Lady Liberty's cape says votes for women. And she is standing on these Western states that we saw earlier that allowed women to vote. So it seems that Lady Liberty is standing on these states that have already allowed women to vote. But then I see all these figures here. In these, if I look very closely, these figures are ladies, and they seem to be just like Lady Liberty's maybe pointing the way here. These ladies are looking toward Lady Liberty, and they're trying to grab the liberty she's offering. And the liberty in this case is the ability to vote. So here in the Midwest, here in the South, we're seeing these ladies do not have the right to vote, so they're looking toward Lady Liberty to give them the vote. And Lady Liberty's walking, and you can see she's walking from west to east. And the feeling here is the awakening that these Western states are awake. They've given their women the right to vote, where the East, that hasn't happened yet. So I think that's what the political cartoon's telling us, and it looks really similar to what we saw on the map. So now we have this reading passage. I'm going to go ahead and read it and see what it says. This is comparing women's suffrage east to west. It says East Coast women existed in a more formalized society. Most women didn't work, and most were forced by either social norms or their own families to exist in a subservient position to their husbands. This is a $50 word here, subservient, and that just means that men had more power and more rights than women, and so women were more second-class citizens at this time. Let's say it says the vast majority of these women were passive toward the idea of women's suffrage, meaning they really didn't care. This again is East. They may have supported the idea internally, but the actual number who spoke up about it was fairly small because it was a social no-no. So what am I seeing? A couple things about the East. More formal. Most women didn't work. There was a lot of social norms on women that made them kind of in the shadows compared to what their husbands did. They didn't speak up because it was against the formalized society, and it was a social no-no to speak up about it. So this second paragraph says things were different out west. So how were they different? Pioneer women often worked alongside their husbands on the farm or establishing new businesses and were often seen as equal partners in the relationship. They were far more likely to speak up when wronged, and it wasn't uncommon for them to own property in their own names. In that kind of environment, it was much harder for men to argue that women were inferior, and a much larger percentage of men were open to the idea of giving their partners the same legal rights they had. So really, in this particular passage, we're seeing the differences between East and West. East, we saw more formal. Women didn't speak up. West, more of an equal partnership. Women worked alongside men, and they worked hard if they were getting a farm started out west. Woo! So women were more likely to own businesses. We saw in another lesson that single women were a lot of the homesteaders that went out and claimed land under the Homestead Act. So they were able to own some property in their own names. So very different belief between East and West and how people would act there. So stopping that, this just gives you an idea of the Think Aloud. And essentially what you're doing for students is you're showing them what is going on inside your brain as you're teaching a particular thing. So they can develop these skills. Just as we develop these skills, we weren't born knowing how to analyze political cartoons or maps or readings. We learned it, and our students can do that too. So just a little bit on how to do the Think Aloud, and try this method with your students and let us know how it works.